On that sunny autumn afternoon, Clara, a 25-year-old girl, was walking hurriedly along the narrow street that led to the city center. His thoughts were far away, busy with the tasks of the day, when, as he passed by an old and charming house, something caught his attention. Outside, an elderly woman with graying hair and a delicate air was bent over a small table in the front yard, struggling to repair the frame of a visibly old painting. Clara slowed down, observing the difficulty the elderly woman was facing. His trembling fingers could barely hold onto the loose pieces of the frame. Clara hesitated for a moment, but her sense of empathy spoke louder. He approached the lady, worried. "Do you need help?" he asked with a welcoming smile. The elderly woman looked up, surprised by the unexpected offer. His eyes, despite the wrinkles that surrounded them, had a gentle shine, although full of years of experience. "Ah, dear. Yes, if it's not inconvenient," replied the elderly woman, in a soft and grateful voice. Clara noticed that the painting the lady was trying to repair was an old painting, with faded colors and a frame that, although beautiful, was badly damaged by time. "It looks very old," Clara commented, as she crouched down next to the table to help. The elderly woman, smiling slightly, nodded. "Yes, it is a family heirloom, passed through many hands before reaching me. But as you can see, time has not been kind to it." The two worked together for a few minutes, exchanging cordial words as they adjusted the worn frame. Clara's practical skill contrasted with the elderly woman's delicacy, but there was a connection there, a sense of peace as they both took care of the object that seemed to carry immense emotional value. As they adjusted the pieces of the frame, the elderly woman began to share stories. He talked about the old house, which had been in the family for generations, and how each piece of furniture and each painting had a unique story. Clara listened with growing curiosity, fascinated by the past that seemed to be permeated in every corner of that property. The conversation flowed naturally, and time seemed to slow down under the soft late afternoon light. "My family has always valued this painting very much. It reminds me of simpler times, of a life that no longer exists," said the elderly woman, with a melancholic tone. After some effort, the frame was finally fixed. "Okay, I think it's pretty firm now," said Clara, standing up and cleaning her hands. The elderly woman looked at the painting with an expression of deep gratitude. "Thank you so much, my dear. You can't imagine how much this means to me." Clara smiled, pleased to have helped. "I felt an inexplicable connection with that lady, as if the act of repairing something so old had somehow connected their lives." Before leaving, the elderly woman introduced herself. "My name is Donna Teresa. If you ever want to come back for tea, I will be very happy to welcome you." Clara accepted the invitation with a shy smile, without imagining that this apparently simple meeting would be the beginning of something much bigger and unexpected. He said goodbye, promising to return soon. However, as she walked back home, a strange uneasiness settled in her chest, as if that day had somehow marked the beginning of a new journey, something she still couldn't understand. The next day, Clara felt compelled to return to Donna Teresa's house. But this time, something in her behavior changed. "I was no longer alone." Beside him walked a tall man, in a dark suit and with a serious expression. He carried a leather briefcase in his hands. Clara, now with a closed expression and a firm posture, was accompanied by a lawyer. Clara barely recognized herself as she walked alongside the lawyer towards Donna Teresa's house. The image of the kind and relaxed young woman, who the day before had offered to help an elderly woman without asking for anything in return, seemed to have been left behind. Now, his expression was one of determination. His eyes fixed on the small house in front of him, and his posture, once relaxed, was rigid and focused. The lawyer beside him, a middle-aged man, carried a professional and impenetrable aura. The two didn't exchange many words as they approached the property. When they reached the gate, Clara hesitated for a brief second. The gate creaked as it was pushed open, revealing the same garden where she had helped repair the frame the day before. But now that environment felt different. The light and welcoming atmosphere from before had been replaced by something more tense, almost heavy. Clara felt her heart racing in her chest, a mixture of anxiety and determination intertwining. He knew that what was about to happen would forever change the relationship he had started with Dona Teresa. The lawyer, who seemed to notice Clara's slight hesitation, lightly touched her shoulder, encouraging her to continue. "Are you ready?" he asked in a serious, almost cold tone. Clara just nodded, unable to gather words at that moment. "I knew there was no going back. What needed to be done would be done." He took a deep breath, walked to the front door and rang the bell. Seconds later, the door was slowly opened by Dona Teresa, who was once again surprised to see Clara. However, this time the surprise was not one of joy. Upon seeing the lawyer beside her, her expression of surprise quickly turned to distrust. "Clara," began Dona Teresa, her voice soft but full of doubt. "What is happening?" Clara felt a tightness in her chest when she saw the elderly woman's confused look. "For a moment, I wanted to give up, go back to being the kind young woman who helped with the frame and leave everything as it was. But she knew that wasn't possible." "Can we come in?" Clara asked, her voice a little firmer than she intended. Dona Teresa hesitated for a moment, looking at the lawyer with growing suspicion, but finally opened the door wider, allowing them to enter. Upon crossing the threshold of the house, Clara noticed that the environment, so welcoming the day before, now seemed filled with an almost palpable tension. The air seemed heavier, and every object around, from the antique furniture to the very painting they had repaired, seemed to be watching her. The lawyer, always very formal, sat down in a nearby armchair and opened his briefcase, spreading a series of documents on the coffee table. Clara remained standing, trying to find the right words for what she was about to say. Dona Teresa, who had sat cautiously on the sofa, observed everything in silence, her eyes fixed on Clara as if trying to understand the reason behind that unexpected and formal visit. "Clara, I don't understand," she said, with a mixture of concern and sadness in her voice. "Why did you bring a lawyer to my house?" Clara took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Miss Teresa, there's something I need to talk to you about. Something I discovered yesterday, after I left." His eyes wandered around the room before finally settling on the elderly woman. "The frame I helped fix. It belongs to my family." The silence that followed was deafening. Dona Teresa frowned, evidently confused. "What do you mean, darling?" Clara hesitated, but knew she needed to continue. "I was talking to my mother last night and I described the painting. She recognized it immediately. It turns out this painting had been missing for years, and it belongs to my great-grandmother. It's been in our family for generations." Dona Teresa remained motionless for a few seconds, absorbing the revelation. His eyes, once tender and friendly, were now filled with disbelief. "That can't be," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This painting belongs to my family." The lawyer, taking advantage of the moment of silence, began to speak directly and professionally. "We came here today to resolve this issue. As representatives of Clara's family, we are claiming ownership of the painting. We have documents that prove the origin of the piece and its link with my client's family." Dona Teresa, shaken and visibly perplexed, looked from Clara to the lawyer, trying to process what had just been said. His face reflected a mixture of pain and confusion, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. "But how is that possible? I always knew the painting was part of my family history." Clara, still struggling with her own conflicting feelings, tried to smooth over the situation. "Ms. Teresa, I don't want to cause problems. I just want to understand what happened. Maybe there is some confusion about how this painting got here, but we need to clarify things." The tension between the three people in the room seemed almost unbearable. Clara knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also couldn't ignore the truth that had been revealed. Now, both women were trapped in a web of secrets and ancient stories that needed to be unraveled. The silence in the room became oppressive, broken only by the faint sound of the papers the lawyer was leafing through. Dona Teresa, still visibly shaken by Clara's revelation, seemed to be trying to piece together the fragments of a story that was now beginning to disintegrate before her eyes. Clara, on the other hand, struggled to maintain calm and composure, aware that this was a delicate situation that could worsen at any moment. The lawyer, impassive, waited for the conversation to take a more formal turn. "Dona Teresa," Clara began, feeling a lump in her throat. "I understand that this is difficult to accept, but the documents that my family has indicate that the painting had been missing for a long time. We don't know how it ended up in your hands, but we need to resolve this." She tried to speak kindly, but the seriousness of the matter made the tension evident. The lady, still perplexed, slowly shook her head, as if rejecting the reality that was unfolding. Dona Teresa finally got up, walking slowly towards the painting, now fixed to the wall with the newly repaired frame. She gently touched the object, as if the contact could somehow confirm the truth she always believed she knew. "This painting has always been in my family. It was given to me by my mother, who inherited it from her parents." "How could I belong to your family?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. The lawyer got up from his armchair, gathering the documents he had brought. "With all due respect, Mrs. Teresa, Clara's family records clearly indicate that the painting disappeared during a division of assets following the death of her great-grandmother. Our intention is to clarify how this piece passed from one family to another," he said, while showing the documents to the elderly woman. Clara, noticing Dona Teresa's disturbed look, approached cautiously. "I'm not here to accuse anyone, Dona Teresa. I don't know how this happened. Maybe it was a sale a long time ago or some error in the records, but I don't want you to think we're trying to take something by force." Clara spoke sincerely, but she felt that with each word the situation only became more complicated. Dona Teresa sighed deeply, turning to face Clara. "My dear, I never wanted anything from anyone. This painting has always been here in my house, for as long as I can remember. He is more than a work of art to me. He is part of my story, my life. I can't understand how it can be part of yours too." His voice was filled with sadness, and his teary eyes reflected genuine pain. Clara felt the weight of the situation increasing. That lady deeply believed in what she was saying, and the painting clearly meant much more than a simple object to her. The lawyer, realizing that emotion was dominating the conversation, intervened again. "Miss Teresa, I understand that this is a complicated situation, but the most efficient way to resolve this is to investigate the origins of the condition and clear up any confusion. We are not here to force anything, but we need you to cooperate with this investigation." Dona Teresa nodded slowly, but it felt like the weight of years of memories was beginning to crumble on her shoulders. Clara, seeing the lady's fragility, felt a wave of guilt and discomfort. Although I wanted to clarify the situation, I was not prepared for the pain it would cause to this woman who, until the day before, was just a friendly stranger. "Please give me some time," asked Dona Teresa, her voice breaking. "I need a moment to process all of this." Clara and the lawyer exchanged quick glances before agreeing to Dona Teresa's request. She looked visibly shaken, and they both knew that forcing any response at that moment would be insensitive. The lady sat down again, her eyes lost, as if she were trying to reconstruct decades of memories and emotional connections that tied her to the painting. Clara felt a pang of guilt, even though she knew she was there for legitimate reasons. She did not expect the situation to have such a devastating impact. The lawyer, noticing the emotional tension that hovered in the room, closed the folder containing the documents and took a step forward. "Miss Teresa, we understand that this is a difficult situation and that the painting has an emotional value for you. If you need time to think or even consult your own documentation, we will be happy to continue the conversation at another time." Dona Teresa slowly raised her head, her watery eyes focusing first on the lawyer, then on Clara. "I never intended to take anything from anyone," she began, her voice shaking. "Everything I have here came from my family. I always believed that. This painting was my mother's favorite, and now you tell me it belongs to another family." She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, as if finding the strength to process the words. Clara, in a gesture of solidarity, approached. "Miss Teresa, I know it seems impossible right now, but we are not here to judge you or accuse you of anything. I believe that somehow our stories crossed and the picture ended here. But we need to find out how this happened. There was sincerity in Clara's words, who, despite her firm stance at the beginning, now felt the need to calm the lady. Dona Teresa nodded slowly, but still seemed immersed in her own thoughts. I don't have documents about the painting. I never thought I would need them. He was always here. My mother said it was an inheritance from her grandmother. And for me, that was always enough. The vulnerability in her voice was palpable, and Clara realized how painful this was being for the elderly woman. The lawyer, maintaining a professional tone, but now more careful, intervened again. We understand, Dona Teresa. Maybe you don't have records, but it's possible that there is some story behind the possession of the painting that hasn't been revealed until now. There may have been an exchange, an informal sale, or even a donation that was lost in the records. What we are trying to do is clarify this gap. The elderly woman took a deep breath, seeming to consider the possibilities. Clara felt that the moment was delicate, and that any misplaced word could make the situation worse. Maybe there is a simple explanation that we don't yet know. We can research, look together for a way to clarify everything without rushing, she suggested, seeking to ease the growing tension. Dona Teresa looked at Clara, her eyes reflecting a mix of sadness and gratitude. If you say this painting belongs to your family, I believe you, Clara. But that means someone at some point didn't tell me the whole truth. And it hurts. Clara felt the weight of the elderly woman's words and, for the first time, realized how much this situation was not just a question of possession, but of history, of memories. Now, more than ever, she knew she would have to be careful when dealing with both families' pasts. Let's find out together, Clara said softly, giving Dona Teresa the time she needed to process what had just been revealed. The days that followed were shrouded in a heavy atmosphere of expectation and doubt. Clara couldn't shake her thoughts about the story surrounding the painting. At the same time, the image of Dona Teresa, fragile and disconcerted by the possibility that something so beloved could have belonged to another family, never left his mind. Clara knew that, to move forward, they would need to discover the truth about the painting's origins. The idea of hurting this elderly woman even more bothered her deeply, but she also felt a growing responsibility to bring to light what was buried in the past. Dona Teresa had agreed to investigate further. During a brief and delicate call with Clara, she mentioned that she would look for any old letters or documents that could shed light on how the painting came into her hands. Even without much hope, she was willing to collaborate. Clara, in turn, promised to do the same, searching her own family's archives for any mention of the painting's disappearance. The investigation would not be easy. Clara spent hours going through old documents kept by her mother and grandmother. What he found were vague records, small fragments of a story that had already been lost over time, papers stained by time, purchase receipts for other works of art, but nothing concrete that explained how the painting had disappeared. Everything indicated that, in fact, the piece was in the family until a division of assets that had occurred many years earlier, after the death of his great-grandmother. But the mystery of what happened next remained unanswered. On one of her visits to her mother's house, Clara found herself leafing through an album of old photos. His hands slowly passed through the sepia images, until, suddenly, something caught his attention. It was a photograph of her great-grandmother, dating from the mid-20th century, standing next to a painting. The same painting that was now in Dona Teresa's house. Clara stood still for a moment, her heart racing. It was visual proof that the painting really belonged to his family. However, it still didn't explain how it had gotten out of his hands. With the photograph in hand, Clara decided it was time to meet Dona Teresa again. He called her late in the afternoon, asking to visit the next day. Dona Teresa agreed, but there was something in her voice that conveyed tiredness. Clara understood that this process was being emotionally exhausting for the elderly woman, but there was no other way to move forward. The next day, Clara returned to Dona Teresa's house. When she arrived, the elderly woman greeted her with a weak but sincere smile. I found some old letters. I'm not sure if they're useful, but maybe you can see something I didn't see, the lady said as she led her into the living room. They sat in front of a pile of aged papers, their eyes fixed on the monumental task of unraveling the past. Clara began leafing through the letters, some of them written in an old-fashioned, almost illegible handwriting. There were mentions of family members, exchanges of gifts, and even travel reports. But at one point, a specific letter captured his attention. It was a correspondence dated around 40 years ago, where Dona Teresa's mother mentioned a favor done by a member of Clara's family. The letter was vague, but it suggested that the painting was a gift or payment for some kind of help, something Clara was completely unaware of. Clara read and reread the passage, processing the implications. Dona Teresa, it seems that there was some kind of exchange between our families. Perhaps the painting was given as thanks for some favor. That would explain how he ended up here. The revelation seemed to bring a little more clarity to the confusion. Dona Teresa looked at Clara with teary eyes, relieved and sad at the same time. Maybe you're right. Maybe our family received the painting for some good reason, but no one told me. I spent so long believing it was part of our history. She trailed off, taking a deep breath before continuing. But if he truly belongs to your family, you have the right to have him back. Clara, feeling the weight of the situation, knew that there were still more questions to be answered. The mystery of the painting was being solved, but not without causing pain in the process. Knowing what that meant for Dona Teresa, the young woman felt that, even with the evidence she had, the decision to claim the painting would not be easy. With the evidence in her hands, Clara felt at an impasse. On the one hand, the photograph he had found, combined with the letter from Dona Teresa's mother, confirmed the painting's connection with her family. The story was becoming clear. The painting had been given as a kind of gift or thank you, and its transfer of ownership, although legitimate, had never been formally recorded. However, even with this information, Clara couldn't get rid of the feeling that removing Dona Teresa's painting would be like taking away a piece of that lady's soul. Dona Teresa was sitting next to him, her eyes fixed on the painting hanging on the wall. She seemed more serene than in previous days, but there was a deep melancholy in her countenance. I never knew about this exchange. My mom never told me about it, but it makes sense now, she said in a low voice, almost as if she were talking to herself. I think I always knew, somehow, that this painting wasn't completely ours. But the story he carried made me believe so. Clara watched the elderly woman in silence, weighing the options before her. He knew that if he decided to claim the painting, Dona Teresa could lose it forever. This wasn't just a decorative piece. It was a part of the life and memories of a woman who had spent decades believing he was a link to her own family's past. The loss would be devastating, and Clara felt responsible for this possible pain. The lawyer, who until then had remained in the background during the investigations, had suggested that Clara continue with the claim process. Legally, Clara's family had the right to recover the painting. He had already gathered the necessary documents, and justice was on her side. But Clara hesitated. She did not want to turn that dispute into a legal battle, much less cause Dona Teresa suffering. I could take this painting back to my family, Clara thought aloud. But what would we really gain from it? What means more? The painting itself or the story it carries? She looked at the elderly woman, hoping that those words would create a bridge between them. Clara knew that, at some point, she would have to make a decision. But she wanted Dona Teresa to be involved too. Dona Teresa took a deep breath, and her gaze met Clara's. I understand that the painting has value for your family, just as it did for mine. I won't resist, Clara. If it is yours, you must take it. His voice was calm but filled with sadness. Clara felt a wave of compassion pass through her. All he wanted was to do the right thing, but now he realized that the concept of right wasn't always as clear as it seemed. Upon hearing Dona Teresa's words, Clara realized that the decision was in her hands. She could move forward with her claim and take the painting back to her family, or she could opt for something more. Something that honored the connection between the two families and the emotional value that the painting represented to both of them. The silence that followed Dona Teresa's words seemed to have frozen time. Clara knew that the moment of decision had arrived, and the weight of it made her hesitate. Looking at the painting hanging on the wall, she felt torn between her own family's past and the present of the woman next to her. The young woman understood that the value of the painting was not just in its origin or history, but in the emotions it had awakened in two different generations. The lawyer, already impatient with the delay, looked at Clara, waiting for an answer. He was undoubtedly ready to move forward with the claim, certain that legality would be on his client's side. Clara, however, felt that this was one of those moments when morality transcends what the law says is right. She knew that the decision needed to go beyond simple papers and records. Dona Teresa, the painting is important to me and my family, but... Clara began, hesitating for a second. He means even more to you. I can see that. And it wouldn't be fair for me to take him away now, knowing what he represents. The surprise in Dona Teresa's eyes was immediate. She opened her mouth to respond, but couldn't. The emotion hit her hard, and she just looked at Clara, with teary eyes. For a moment, it seemed as if the tension that had built up over the past few days had been dissolved by those words. Clara felt that she had found a solution that, although it would not solve all the mysteries of the past, could avoid even greater pain in the present. The lawyer, realizing that the situation was getting out of the control he expected, intervened. Clara, understand that you have the right to take this painting. The documentation is clear. If you let this go, your family could forever lose an inheritance that rightfully belongs to you. He spoke firmly, but Clara felt that, despite his intentions, he did not understand the emotional complexity involved in the issue. For him, it was a case of property. For Clara and Dona Teresa, it was something much deeper. Clara took a deep breath, looking at the lawyer with a firm but serene expression. I understand, but sometimes what's right on paper isn't the right thing to do, she said. My family may have a historical connection to this painting, but Dona Teresa has a lifelong emotional connection. I can't just take that away from her. The conviction in his voice made the lawyer flinch slightly. Dona Teresa, touched by Clara's compassion, got up and walked slowly towards the painting. I never thought something so simple could turn into this, she said, her voice shaking. What you're doing, it means a lot to me. Maybe there is a way to share this story between us. Clara smiled slightly, feeling the relief that finally took over the room. I think we can find a way to honor both stories, she said, knowing that choice made the most sense. She didn't need an object to preserve her family's memory. Perhaps the true inheritance was in the decisions we made and the people we touched throughout our lives. With the tension finally eased, the atmosphere in the room changed in subtle but significant ways. Clara and Dona Teresa, previously involved in a conflict of interests and emotions, were now united in search of a solution that would preserve respect for the histories of both families. Clara, feeling lighter after the decision not to formally claim the painting, knew that there was still a way to honor her great-grandmother's memory without causing the elderly woman any more pain. Dona Teresa, still moved by Clara's generosity, approached the young woman with careful steps and extended her hand, in a gesture of affection and gratitude. You don't know how much what you did today means to me. This painting has always been a part of my life, and I never wanted to deprive anyone of something that had so much emotional value. She smiled, but there was a gleam of sadness in her eyes. Clara could see that, despite the relief, the elderly woman still felt the weight of the past, and perhaps would never completely let go of it. They sat down at the table again, the lawyer observing in silence, while Dona Teresa, after a deep sigh, made an unexpected suggestion. Maybe we don't need to decide who gets the painting. Maybe we can share it. Clara looked at the elderly woman, surprised by the idea, but soon understood what she was suggesting. Dona Teresa continued, with a newfound calm. We can ensure that the painting remains in both families. It may be displayed in your home for a while and then returned to mine. We don't need to share something that, deep down, belongs to both of us. Clara was silent for a moment, processing the proposal. It was a simple idea but full of meaning. The painting, which for so long had carried stories of two families without them knowing, could now symbolize a connection between the past and the present, between different generations. I think this might work, Clara said, finally smiling. This way, the painting continues to be part of our lives, and we don't have to choose between one story or another. Dona Teresa nodded, feeling the weight of the situation lessen even more. For her, it was a relief to know that, even with the revelation that the painting had another origin, it would still remain linked to her home and her memories. Clara, for her part, felt she was making the right decision, one that honored her family's legacy without sacrificing the emotional bonds of another. It was a solution that transcended material possession and focused on what really mattered, the deep meaning of that object. The lawyer, until then oblivious to the emotional connection between the two women, realized that there was no longer any place for a purely legal approach. With a slight bow of his head, he accepted the result. If both are in agreement with this solution, we can formalize this in a simple way. An agreement that respects both parties and allows the painting to be preserved as part of the history of both families. Dona Teresa and Clara exchanged smiles. The painting that had caused so much tension now became a symbol of reconciliation and mutual respect. More than that, it represented the union of generations and the appreciation of shared memories, something that no document or legal dispute could destroy. With the agreement established, Clara and Dona Teresa felt that a new chapter had been written, not only for the painting, but for their own lives. The object, which previously seemed to be the center of a conflict, now became a symbol of something much bigger. The connection between two families, united by a mystery that had been resolved with empathy and understanding. The two women, from different generations but equally linked by their stories, were about to transform that conflict into a legacy of cooperation and respect. The days following the decision were peaceful. Clara and Dona Teresa kept in touch, exchanging ideas about how the painting could move between the two families. Both were committed to honoring the agreement without complicated bureaucracy, but with a deep feeling that, in doing so, they were handling their stories fairly. Clara even suggested that they could write together a brief account of the painting's history, which could accompany the play, explaining the unexpected journey that brought their families together. Dona Teresa, thrilled, accepted immediately. "This painting deserves its true story to be told," she said, with a soft smile. Clara began to visit Dona Teresa's house more regularly, now no longer as an adversary or someone in search of answers, but as a friend. During their visits, they spent hours talking about their families, exchanging memories and, little by little, reconstructing the fragmented past that had been revealed. Dona Teresa shared stories of her childhood, her mother and the time when she believed that the painting was an unquestionable part of her heritage. Clara, in turn, spoke about memories of her great-grandmother, who she now saw with new eyes. The reconciliation of memories created something unique, a shared legacy that transcended the material value of the painting. The first time Clara took the painting to her mother's house was a moment of great emotion. His mother, upon seeing the painting she had believed lost for so long, could not hold back her tears. "I thought I'd never see this again," she said, gently touching the frame that Clara and Dona Teresa had repaired together. The painting was not just a piece of art, but a link between generations that, in a way, represented the resistance and continuity of their family histories. However, Clara also explained to her mother the decision she had made together with Dona Teresa. "This painting belongs to both families, Mom. It will stay here for a while, but then it will return to Dona Teresa's house. We share this story now, and that's how it should be." Her mother, initially surprised, quickly understood what Clara had done and, although she was anxious to keep the painting at home, respected the agreement with dignity. "You did right," she said, hugging Clara. "More than a work of art, you preserved something much greater, respect for other lives." As time passed, the painting was seen by friends and family, always accompanied by an account of its complex history, which now had a tone of learning. What had begun as a mystery involving fragmented possessions and memories had become a symbol of reconciliation. Clara's visits to Dona Teresa's house continued, and in each one of them, the painting served as a reminder that, although the past may be uncertain, the choices we make in the present can create new legacies, stronger, more human. And so, between conversations, teas, and peaceful afternoons, Clara and Dona Teresa knew that they had done something more than resolve a conflict. They had chosen to preserve what really matters. Months have passed since the agreement between Clara and Dona Teresa was established, and life has continued at a calmer pace. The painting, which previously symbolized the tension between two family stories, was now seen as a point of union. For Clara, the decision to share the painting had created a new perspective on what was really important. Not the possession of an object, but the memories, relationships, and mutual respect it represented. For Dona Teresa, the feeling was similar. She had accepted that the painting did not originally belong to her family, but now understood that her connection to it was no less meaningful for that. The first time the painting returned to Dona Teresa's house, the moment was celebrated with affection. Clara and her mother made a point of taking the painting in person, not only as a gesture of respect, but as a way to further strengthen the bonds they had created. When Clara placed the painting back on the wall of Dona Teresa's living room, the elderly woman looked at it with a look that mixed nostalgia and satisfaction. "It's funny," said Dona Teresa, with a wistful smile, "how something I thought was just mine now seems even more valuable because we share it." The painting's journey, which now alternated between the homes of the two families, began to have a much greater meaning than either of them could have imagined at the beginning. When the painting was in Clara's house, it was a symbol of family heritage. In Dona Teresa's house, it represented the generosity and emotional connection that had been built. For both women, the painting was now a constant reminder that despite differences in time, there was always a way to find peaceful, meaningful solutions. The relationship between Clara and Dona Teresa also strengthened. What started as a chance meeting and then a possible conflict evolved into an unlikely friendship. Clara often visited to have tea and talk about life. Dona Teresa, who previously seemed like a lonely woman, now felt reinvigorated by the young woman's presence in her life. The two laughed and got emotional as they talked about their families, their struggles, and their achievements. It was as if the painting had fulfilled a greater function, uniting two generations in ways neither could have predicted. Eventually, the story of the painting began to spread among friends and acquaintances. When someone visited any of the homes, it was inevitable that they would ask about the piece of art. Clara and Dona Teresa always told the same story, with a sparkle in their eyes and a smile of someone who knew there was something special there. It was not a story about disputes or legal battles, but about understanding, generosity, and, above all, respect for the experiences and memories of those around. As time passed, Clara realized that the decision she made that day, alongside Dona Teresa and the lawyer, had shaped more than just the painting's fate. It had shaped the way she viewed life, possessions, and human connections. Material things have value, thought Clara, but the real value lies in what we do with them and the impact they have on our lives and the lives of others. On a sunny spring afternoon, while Clara and Dona Teresa were having tea in the elderly woman's garden, the young woman reflected on everything that had changed since that first chance meeting. "I never imagined fixing a picture frame would take me this far," she said, smiling. Dona Teresa nodded, also smiling, with a sparkle of affection in her eyes. "Sometimes the simplest things have the most profound results," the elderly woman replied, savoring the peaceful moment they now shared. At that moment, they both understood that the painting, with all its stories and secrets, had fulfilled its true purpose. It was no longer a piece of art, but a living symbol of empathy and humanity.